This is a critique of the utilization of music by casino managers, an interview study. It was written by Stephanie Branley, Nicola Dibben, and Richard Rowe. The paper was published in March of 2016. The purpose of the paper is to summarize interview data regarding the use of music in casinos. 11 casinos in 2 counties of the United Kingdom were approached. Out of the 11, 4 managers agreed to do in-person interviews, and 1 agreed to an interview over the phone. Between the 5 interviews conducted, the average interview length was 23 minutes. Information pertaining to the interviewees was not disclosed in the article. Introduction Critique. This article has both an abstract and introduction. The abstract properly outlines music as it pertains to multiple hospitality sectors. It also addressed the purpose of the article, who was interviewed, the purpose of the interview, and a short synopsis of the interview results. The abstract gave the reader an idea about what they would read in the rest of the article. The introduction was very long. There was much discussion and speculation about music in retail and commercial environments. There was much lead up to the problem statement that was clear at the end. To what extent and why do casino managers utilize music? This problem statement is researchable if done properly. The research done here has its faults and could have been done over a larger pool of people. It was nice to have an overview of how other sectors use music. However, it could have been a more brief overview in order to keep the reader's attention. This problem statement has much speculation in the casino industry, not only in the United Kingdom, but in the United States as well. There have been claims that casino managers will use music to make the gamblers bet more or stay longer at their establishment. While nothing has been reported to support these claims, this article tries to support or debunk any hypotheses made in regards to music in casinos and how management handles it. Literature review. Multiple articles were cited in the introduction. They all had to do with music, but not necessarily music in casinos. Some of the citations could be construed as bias because the same authors of this piece were the authors of the cited works called Investigating the Influence of Music Tempo on Arousal and Behavior in Laboratory Roulette. By using a previous article you have written to support the claims of this article does not bode well. The cited article was also written with the knowledge from the interviews in this study. The literature that was cited were good references for this article. There have been very minimal professional articles written about the use of music in casinos and its psychological effects on the gambler. Of the few that have been written, they were cited. Due to the fact there are not many articles on this specific subject, the authors did review other pertinent literature, including, but not limited to, How Casinos Keep You Gambling, Exploring Machine Player Behavior, and Exploring Managers' Implicit Theories of Atmospheric Music. There were a few articles that did not assist with the purpose of the paper. There were as many secondary sources as there were primary sources. The authors were smart to show that multiple sources said similar things about music. Music is used because silence is considered inappropriate in places such as restaurants and hotels. Multiple sources state that music is important in making sure guests' attitudes are upbeat. While that is merely speculation, it would be something that could be clearly backed up by observation. It would be beneficial for the readers if there was a short summary of all the literature and how it relates to the problem statement. The paper addressed multiple articles individually, but didn't relate it back to the problem statement. Hypotheses were stated from cited articles, but the authors did not clearly state what complete actions they would take in the interviews to test it. Each hypothesis is only testable by conversations and interviews. Because these interviews are only with casino managers, that will not be enough to address the hypotheses that have to do with the casino patrons. Psychiatrists and psychologists would be needed to determine if music in the casino has psychological effects on the gambler. A simple interview study will not be enough, as actual controlled testing would need to be done. Design and methodology. It was clearly noted why these certain casinos were asked to participate in the study. It was a mix of casinos that were run by two of the only three companies that own the majority of casinos in the UK. They all also had proper licensing. Due to the random selection and the response rate from the casino managers, it would be fair to say that this is an unbiased sample group. Of the 5 interviewees, 3 were male and 2 were female. Ethical approval was obtained by the Research Ethics Committee within a music department of Sheffield University. It shows that proper steps were taken to ensure the integrity of these interviews. Readers were not told the state of the interviews. It is unclear whether the authors conducted the interviews, whether the interviewees were on or off the clock when answering questions, and more. These details would provide greater understanding to the formality of the study. Possibly due to the effect of it being an interview study, the authors could have assumed no control procedures were needed. In order to have a proper and respectable study completed, there must be control factors. Since there were 5 interviewees with an average discussion time of 23 minutes each, that is not enough data to allow for proper understanding and evidence. To have just over an hour of total data collected is very minimal, and it would have been beneficial for more interviews to be conducted. It was noted that the interviews were only semi-structured. If not everyone was asked the same questions, then it wouldn't be possible to form a complete analysis by comparing answers. 9 questions were asked of the casino managers. They were all open-ended. Because they were all open-ended questions, it left room for much interpretation and perception. On a positive note, none of the questions were leading, and they were all straightforward to leave no room for incorrect interpretation of that question. One important question was missing. Managers should have asked if they change or use music for the sole purpose to changing the attitudes of their guests. Although this is not an open-ended question, the answer given could have allowed for more questions to be asked and therefore more answers. If they do change the music to change the mood of the guest, how do they do it? And when do they normally do it? The article stated that it was quite possible these managers were not being 100% truthful in their answers. Managers may have not wanted to admit that they were manipulating the music, or maybe they understood more about patrons' behavior than they were leading on. For future studies of this kind, it may provide more valuable data should the interviews be anonymous. Anonymity could be important because casino managers don't want their views getting out to the people who actually choose the music. It would allow for more in-depth and truthful responses. Results. Thematic analysis was used. This meant that theoretical freedom was allowed, and it was not bound to exploring how individuals make sense of their experiences. Experiences are examined across a dataset, and common themes could then be revealed. If you are not to make sense of individuals' experiences, how are you to properly understand the data? The authors went into grave detail on the many different answers provided in the interviews. It was then broken up by the different types of music in casinos. Multiple subheadings were used for an easy flow of information. The authors presented the answers to their questions based on 7 categories. All categories matched and responded to the questions that were asked. Under each category was a reasoning statement and the information to support it. They then went on to talk about the reasons why music was in the casinos, as to not just discuss how it was used. When the authors summarize gamblers' reactions to music, it is all perception and speculation. One manager talked about 2 different types of gamblers to which they had no supportive data. As it has been determined, there are more than 2 types of gamblers. Yes, all of the managers' responses were based on their observations and responsibilities. But you can easily respond to what you see and what you do. It is harder to hold value on something you think someone else feels. Therefore, because everything in that section was speculation on how customers feel, it holds less value. The authors stated that all of the interviews were audio recorded, then transcribed. It was noted that the audio equipment failed to record a session properly, and therefore the notes taken during the interview were used for analysis. It is unfortunate that the recording equipment failed, because the authors could have lost valuable data that the note taker did not write down. Although results were clear and support the research, it would have been nice to have a table comparing the 5 interviews. It would have been an easy synopsis to address the simple answers. Then the authors could go more in depth with the answers that the managers didn't share. Multiple quotes were used from the interviews. These quotes were hard to understand. Partial quotes would have been more appropriate and easier for the reader to understand. Some of the quotes used did not have good correlation to the results being discussed or the problem statement. To some extent, it was as though quotes were being used to only fill the pages. Conclusion and future research. The conclusion of the paper is very long. The authors sum up that the result of these interviews do not support claims that the casinos play mildly hypnotic music that was hypothesized in one of their cited works. The authors' generalizations are consistent when reviewing the results. Through the conclusion, a lot of information was repeated from earlier in the paper. Instead of a brief synopsis of the results and steps moving forward, it was an overview of the interviews and more discussions on how the results either supported or debunked other theories from cited literature. It was addressed that the results of these interviews coincide with some theories suggested by hotels, restaurants, and bars. These 6 theories should have been addressed on an earlier section of the paper to allow for a short conclusion. The authors spoke to the limitations of the size of the study. It was noted that a larger scale study could obtain more useful information on the subject. However, they did not address the fact this was not a controlled study. For future studies, it would be pertinent to not only interview casino managers, but to also interview who provides the music to the managers, as managers stated that they did not always pick the music themselves. It was sometimes given to them. The next set of authors conducting such interviews should consider finding out whose decision it is to select the music and set up interviews with them. Since there are minimal papers out there addressing this subject, it was very informative. Takeaways. Due to the many flaws in this paper, I am not sure it would be of value to use for decision making. It is important to remember that the interviews were conducted and this article was written in the United Kingdom. These casinos interviewed were smaller compared to the US. They had a maximum of 20 machines. What casino managers find valuable in the UK may not even be on the radars of managers of casinos in the United States. At this time, I do not see us ever being able to fully know if the hypotheses on this subject are confirmable or denied. A much more in-depth study would need to be conducted on different types of gamblers, the different casinos, and different types of music. With gambling being seen as a bad habit, this type of study is likely to not happen. Until then, more speculation will continue to arise.